Welcome back. Last time we were together, we left you with this image, and many of you guessed that our next topic would be about birds. Winter birding is one of my favorite things to do. During other times of the year, I often don't get to see the birds up close because they're hidden in the treetops and the leaves camouflage them. And they also have plenty of food in the natural spaces in the forest around me, so they don't often come to my backyard feeder. This week, together, we're going to spend some time learning how to identify some of the common birds that you might see in and around your neighborhoods at this time of year. We'll talk about what they look like, as well as what they sound like. And we'll even include some clues about where you might find them, or how you can see evidence that they've been in the air. If you have been recording your observations in your journal, I encourage you to pause the video at any time so you can draw a picture of one of the birds that we're talking about, and even write down some of the information that you might be learning about them. This will act as a field guide, and that way you'll be able to use your own journal when you go out birding.
The first bird we're going to introduce you to is a very well-liked bird. It's found in forests, parks, or even in your backyard. It's a very social bird, and you may have even interacted with it very close up.
Did the black-capped chickadee come to mind for you? This bird has a bold black and white head pattern, a compact body, and a short bill. So when we look at the color pattern, it has white cheeks and a gray back. It has a black cap or crown, and just below the bill or the beak is the black bib. Black-capped chickadees are quite small birds. They measure between 12 and 15 centimeters and weigh only about 10 grams. That's about the weight of the pencil that you're using today.
You may have had the experience of a chickadee coming and feeding out of your hand, maybe in your backyard or some green spaces that are around Ottawa. Notice how each chickadee's coming down, selecting a seed, and going back to the tree to eat. It takes them a while to break open the seed. So they want to be somewhere safe in the trees, away from predators, to have the time to do that, to get inside of it. They're not only social birds with humans, they're also social birds with each other. So they fly in flocks. So you'll often see maybe 10, 12, 15 chickadees all together fluttering around the trees. You may have heard before that birds migrate in the wintertime. So migration is a term that refers to animals that go south in the wintertime in the cold weather, and they usually do that so that they can stay warm and find food. But you'll notice here on this cold winter day that the black-capped chickadees are still here. So they actually stay in around Ottawa in the wintertime. There's a few different strategies that black-capped chickadees can use to survive here in Ottawa through the winter. One of them is that they can take some of their seed or their food, insects or spiders that they've found, and they can tuck it away in tree cavities and go back weeks later and find it. Another way is that humans can leave seed out for them in their backyard or feed them from their hands. A couple other things that happen within the chickadee's body is that its body temperature actually lowers, so they lose less heat on those cold winter nights. And they can puff up their feathers, so that traps the heat nice and close to their body and keeps them warm at night, just like a big puffy jacket would keep me warm at night. I'm going to take a minute just to listen very carefully to see what I can hear. I noticed just minutes ago, all the chickadees moved up to the treetops and started calling out to each other, chickadee dee 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 dee. The number of D's that they have at the end of that call indicates the level of threat. So the more that they say D, the higher the threat, meaning that there might be a predator in the area. One really interesting thing about chickadees and flocks of chickadees is other birds that they associate that you may see around the parks or your neighborhood or even in your backyard, they also pay attention to the bird calls of chickadees. And especially that chickadee dee dee, they will use that as an indicator as well to know that there may be threats in the area like predators.
Hello, David here, and today I would like to introduce you to one of my favorite families of birds in the area. And before I tell you the name, I'm going to ask you to think of a bird. I'm just going to throw a color out there, and I want you to tell me the first bird that comes to mind when you hear that color. Okay? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Black. Now, if you are anything like me, then that first bird is about 1.5 foot tall, maybe as tall as from my elbow up to the top of my hand there, completely black with a sharp, smooth bill, and you recognize it by its sound. I'm talking about the crow. There are other blackbirds in the Ottawa area, but the crow really stands out among them. And I want to point out a couple of things to you today, things that you can look for when you're out in the field and observing birds, and point out some of the features. Now, this is usually a bird that people don't have a hard time recognizing. So if we take a look at it, here you can see its body is entirely black. It does have a sharp, strong bill, and it looks pretty smooth over its entire body there. Take a look at the tail. When it's in flight, you're likely to see it that way. And it's more like a fan shape. It has kind of a rounded end to it, and that's how you can distinguish it from its larger cousin. Now, crows are abundant here in Ottawa. There are a lot of them. In fact, I was watching some just fly overhead behind me. You can see I'm not at McSkimming today. I'm actually in the city. I'm at the Arboretum, and there were groups of them, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, that were flying overhead. And I know they're going to a place out near Chio where thousands of birds, thousands of crows, meet every night in a communal roost. So they stay together in this one spot at night, and then they disperse or fly out from there for the day to feed in various areas. So what are they eating? Well, crows are omnivores, and they'll eat just about anything that they can get a hold of. They'll certainly eat grain and fruits and berries when they're available, but a large part of their diet is other animals. Right? So it could be insects and worms, could be small mammals even, so field mice and things if they can get them, or snakes. Another part of their diet is carrion, so dead things. And they do so well in the city because they also feed on our garbage. Crows are one of the most fascinating birds to watch because they're so smart. Right? They're known to use tools, to make and use tools. Scientists have determined they can recognize a person's face and learn the habits. So they know if you're a bad person to avoid you, and they might even mob you, which means they might fly down in groups and sort of attack you to keep you away from their area. And they'll do the same thing to predators. So they're very vocal. They tend to be very social. So they usually are traveling in at least family groups, if not larger groups. Crows are fun to watch because they're so smart, and they're often unpredictable. They actually like to play, and you can find them doing all sorts of things, and you can usually get fairly close because they're a big bird, and they're tolerant of humans at least. Then you can usually make some good observations of crows. Now, their bigger cousin, this bird here, the raven, it's actually bigger. Its whole body is as long as my arm, from my fingertips to my elbow in length, so 2 feet long. And when we see the raven in flight, you can see here, its tail is more of a wedge shape or a diamond shape on the end. Still completely black. If we look closely at the head, though, we can see kind of on the throat there's ruffled feathers, and that beak is that much thicker and stronger than that of the crow. Now, they're omnivores also, but they tend to feed on a lot more meat because they tend to be birds that live in wild areas. We often find them feeding on the kills of other animals, especially in the far north. And often they'll follow wolves and other hunting animals around to feed on what's left of their prey. And you can distinguish them because of their voice. Now, if we listen to the kind of the cronk or croak calls of the raven here, you'll hear how it's much deeper and rougher than that of the crow. You hear that deep voice. Now, they can actually, all of these birds can really even mimic human speech and can make some crazy sounds depending on where they are that they might learn from their environment. You should check out some videos on YouTube of ravens speaking. It's pretty cool. Another member of this corvid family is the smallest one in the area here, and I want to try the thing with color again. So I'm going to say a color. You think of a bird. Blue. Did the blue jay come to mind? The fact that we're here in Ontario and the Toronto Blue Jays are here, we often see the symbols of the Blue Jays. Most people, again, it's a bird that we just recognize. There's no other bird out there that can be confused with this. It's about a foot in length, so maybe from my elbow to here. If we look more closely at the Blue Jay here, you can see it's got some distinguishing marks. If people haven't seen it before, mostly blue back, the tail with the kind of white tips and the black bars on it there, and that crest is unmistakable. The black necklace and kind of the white beard, sort of like I have. Still an omnivore, but it tends to eat more of the seeds and the nuts and less meat than the other two would eat. The jays are also very vocal. In fact, they have a nickname, the Sentinel of the Forest, because they tend to be very observant of what's going on around them, and they will signal if there's any predatory activity, if there's any dangers in the area. So when you're out exploring the forest, if you hear a jay calling, and it sounds something like this, if you hear that jay call when you're out in the forest, then usually you can spot them up in the top of a tree, look toward the tops of the trees, and if there are multiple jays, you might hear them calling, and they can help you to focus in on a predator that's in the area, unless it's you that they're calling about. There you have it, 3 corvids in our area that really stand out, are easy to observe, and that are just fun to watch.
I've come across this tree in the forest, and they've got all of these markings in it, as if something's been attacking it. Have you ever seen marks like this in a tree before? Do you know what's created this marks? Is it an animal or is it a bird? It is a bird. Only one type of a bird will make markings like this in trees. Do you know what kind of bird that is? A woodpecker. They're the only type of bird that have adapted to be able to withstand the pressure of banging its head against a tree to make all of these holes. Now, if we look up and down this tree, you'll definitely notice that there's different sizes of holes. There's some that are smaller and definitely more pointed or determined at looking for something. And there's some a little higher up that are a lot bigger and maybe creating more of a cavity. First, I'll talk about these smaller holes that I see. Some of these smaller holes look as if something has actually been drilling into the tree, as if it's been looking for something. Now, the drill that was used is actually the beak of the woodpecker. They are designed to drill into these trees and make these holes because they're looking for something really special that's inside this tree. What might they be looking for? Food? Water? Are they eating the tree? They're actually looking for their food. Do you know what woodpeckers eat? They're actually looking for insects and eggs that are crawling underneath the outer bark of the tree.
you'll notice that some of the bark has been chipped and stripped away so that the woodpecker could get into the inner part of the tree where the insects have been living. Have you noticed all of these wood chips like here on top of the snow? This is evidence that tells me the woodpeckers have been here recently. They've been flaking away under the bark. Oh, look, maybe I'm a woodpecker. I just helped knock that one down. Now, some of these bigger holes will eventually be used, or could eventually be used, for animal homes. Some other birds and other animals like chipmunks or squirrels will use some of the bigger cavities created by our biggest woodpecker. The pileated woodpecker is one of the biggest woodpeckers we have around. They can be about this big with beautiful black and white plumage or feathers and a beautiful red crown on top of its head. Check out this video to see a little bit of evidence of them at work. The four main types of woodpeckers that we see at the centers are the pileated woodpecker, the hairy woodpecker, the downy woodpecker, and the yellow-bellied sapsucker. Kind of a silly name, hey? The pileated woodpecker is our biggest woodpecker. They can be quite large, have black and white feathers with a red crown on the top of their head, and they have a really unique call. The downy and the hairy woodpecker are very similar. They can have a red patch on the top of their heads and black and white, almost like a checkerboard feathers. The difference between the downy and the hairy is their size. Think small or down for downy. They're about just a little bit bigger than a chickadee. And the hairy woodpecker is closer to the size of a robin. Other than that, they look pretty much the same. Now, all three of those woodpeckers drill holes in trees to find the insects that are living underneath the bark. The yellow-bellied sapsucker is the unique woodpecker in the way that they capture their food. This tree has been visited by a yellow-bellied sapsucker over and over again. You might be able to see the rows of holes or wells that they have created in the tree. They don't drill as deep down into the tree as other woodpeckers do, because all they want to do is get the sap flowing enough to fill these little holes. Once the sap has filled the holes, insects go to visit it because it's sweet and delicious. They get stuck in the sap, and then the yellow-bellied sapsucker comes back and eats those insects out of those wells. Now, after that's happened, these wells are great little places for chickadees to hide their seeds, or for other insects or creatures like squirrels and chipmunks to hide food lower down, where they can come and collect them later on. Another bird that can benefit from these wells full of delicious sweet sap is the hummingbird. If they come back before a lot of the early spring flowers have started to bloom and are providing nectar, they can actually visit these wells and drink this sap and be nourished until those flowers start blooming. Oftentimes you can find evidence of woodpeckers anywhere there's dead trees like this one. You can see the holes and all of the little marks. Sometimes woodpeckers will even come to backyard feeders for the seeds and things that they may not be able to find in nature. Earlier this winter, David even found some pileated woodpeckers at the experimental farm right in the city. Take a look at this video that he recorded of them.
I find all of the birds we've talked about today quite fascinating, but there are one special group of birds that are quite a bit different from the ones that we've talked about so far that really amaze me, and that is the grouping of owls. So owls are considered a bird of prey, which means that they are carnivores, and so they eat a lot of meat, and they have some really great adaptations and tools that allow them to be such skilled hunters. Let's take a look at this video from McSkimming of an owlet as we go through some of the features that make these owls such skilled hunters. First, let's take a look at those strong feet and the claws. We call those talons. They're great for grasping prey. And their beak is quite small and sharp, which is great for tearing apart prey. You may have noticed that this owl has quite a large head in comparison to the rest of its body, and it also has a pretty flat face. You may have also noticed the large eyes on this owl. Now, something cool about their eyes is that they're actually fixed in their head, so they can only see in the direction that their head is facing. Unlike us, where we can look out of the corner of our eye at something without actually having to turn our head in that direction. So in order to help owls to be able to see all around them, they have an adaptation where there are extra vertebrae in their neck. Their neck is longer than it looks from when you see a photo of an owl. If you look at its skeleton, you then can see this extra long neck that allows them to be able to turn their heads 270 degrees around. That's almost all the way around. Take a look at this video of two owlet siblings at McSkimming and watch as their heads can turn in all directions. Having these two eyes, both facing forward, allow owls to have binocular vision. So maybe you've looked through a set of binoculars at home before. That can give you an idea of what it's like to have the eyes of an owl and to see detail at a distance. Again, this allows them to be able to zone in on prey from quite a far distance and silently swoop in to catch their prey before the prey even notices. Owls have ears just like we do, but they are far more sensitive than ours, and they can hear their prey, maybe a lemming underneath the snow, from a far distance away. Another feature that allows owls to be such great hunters has to do with their feathers. So firstly, their feathers are quite a bit softer than other birds of prey, which allows them to silently approach their prey and sneak up on them. And also, owls are quite well camouflaged, so their feathers are often the colors of their natural habitat. So take a look at this barred owl photo that I captured a few weeks ago in Canada. The only reason I was able to see this owl in the first place was because it had actually flown through the forest up into that tree. If it had stayed still and hadn't moved, I would have walked right below that tree and never noticed it. Now, a visitor owl to the Ottawa area is also well camouflaged in this winter habitat. We've had lots of questions about this owl, and that is the snowy owl. These special owls are not full-year residents in Ontario. They're actually only here generally for a short time over the winter. Sometimes adult owls come, but it's often the younger owls that are migrating from up north, south into this province and this area, and mostly for food. So winters up in the tundra can be quite harsh, and it can be difficult to find food to get through the winter. So they move to more southern climates. Believe it or not, Ottawa is south in comparison to where they live normally in their breeding range, and they come here in search of food. We've been talking a lot about prey, but what do owls actually eat? Typically, they're going to be searching out small mammals such as mice or voles, maybe some snowshoe hares or cottontail rabbits and squirrels. They may also eat other birds, amphibians such as frogs, and also fish. So I know what you might be thinking. It looks like I'm holding a pile of scat, but this is actually the undigested material that comes out of an owl as vomit after they've eaten their prey. Owls, when they're hunting, typically eat a whole mouse or a whole lemming, and their body and their stomach isn't able to digest all of the parts of that animal. Typically, the bones, feathers, fur, nails, all of those sorts of things can't be digested. And so the owl's body compresses these materials into what's called a pellet, and 7 to 24 hours after they've had a meal, they'll actually throw up this meal, and this can often be found below their roosting sites in a tree, or in this case, this is a snowy owl pellet. Christine found this underneath a hydro pole that a snowy owl had been spending a lot of time at. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of curious to see what this snowy owl was eating. How about you come join me inside and we will dissect this to see if we can figure out what its diet looks like. You don't need anything fancy in order to dissect an owl pellet. I'm just using some tweezers and a plastic tray. Now you can see there's a lot of hair. That's that black stuff that's up at the top and to the left of the tray. And I'm starting to pull the bones out of this hair and pellet and pile them down at the bottom. You'll notice different shapes, and I've even found a couple skulls of rodents. I can tell it's a rodent because of its size and also because of those very orange teeth, which are characteristic of these animals. And a snowy owl specifically needs to eat anywhere from 3 to 5 lemmings per day. So based on how many skulls I've found, I think this snowy owl was eating pretty well. Another tool that you might want to have on hand is a guide or a map of the skeletons of different creatures that owls might consume, so that you could figure out which parts and which types of animals you're finding in the pellet.
Oh, you're back. I hope you enjoyed learning about some of the birds that you might see in and around the Ottawa area during this winter season. Now, you may have noticed that we couldn't include every species of bird, so we just focused on a few of our favorites. There may be some that you know are in and around your house that we haven't included in this video. Now, as I stand out in my backyard today, the sound of the birds is so loud. I might even decide to do a soundscape today. What's a soundscape? Well, a soundscape is when you take your journal and something to record with, and I'm going to sit quietly underneath this tree, and I'm going to record all of the sounds that I hear all around me. Today I'm hearing so many different bird calls that I want to make a record, and a soundscape is a different way to do that. I have a few challenges for you this week. Your first challenge is to get outside and see what types of birds are moving around and feeding at your local feeders or in your local green spaces. The second part of that challenge is to find a way to record what you're seeing. Your third challenge is to try a soundscape. Find a day that's beautiful like today, and find a quiet place to sit where you can listen to everything that's happening around you. And the fourth challenge is to share your questions with us. You can link to the forum in the description of this video and send us all of the things that you're curious about. So until next time, happy birding.